So there's many ways to set something up, but usually you want your UVs to be nice and square and relaxed and not stretched so that you can apply any material to your object and it will look proper. When you when you start stretching out the UVs, you'll run into issues like this on the leg where the mask, it will appear blurred or low resolution because the UVs aren't set properly. Also, usually you want to keep all your UV below turbo smooth. If you use a UVW modifier, a UVW unwrap, and create your own seams, you don't need stuff like this. These are all the same material, but because the UVs were done with a UVW map for each channel, channel 5, channel 4, you can do all of this in one unwrapped UVW. What's he saying? Is there any questions? Okay. All right, so let's start fresh with just the UVs on the tabletop. I'm going to isolate it. And I'm going to take off the turbo smooth for right now because there's like 3 iterations and you want to make sure that you do all of your UV work below this. All right. So to start off, I'm just going to reset everything and remove all seams. You can try resetting, or you can actually go down and just do a planar map, and that will give you just a top-down projection in the z-axis. So I'm going to go around and select all the edges where I want seams and select the edge loop, especially on corners like this. You can select more than one edge and then click the edge loop button and it will select all of the edge loops for that piece. So right here I have one edge here, one edge here, one edge here, and when I click select edge loop, it'll select all three, the entire loop for each one. To break it, I can go into the editor and go Tools, Break, or Control B. Control B works in the viewport. So I can keep that closed. Hit Control B, and now I have seams. I need to select these edges here to cut off these pieces of wood because they're separate pieces. I don't really, actually I do want a seam there, that works. So Control B, and I only have like 4 more to select. Okay. I am going to deselect this part here and here. Make sure that ignore back facing is off so that I can select right through it. And now I just need to relax everything. Everything is already cut the way I want. You could even select everything for right now and just do a pack to see how it lays out. Then once you apply your wood, you're going to want to make sure you rotate each piece so that the grain is going in the proper direction. So I'm going to select one of the materials. Make sure everything's set to default, map channel 1. And I'm going to apply it to it for right now. Actually, I need to relax these first too. You need to make sure that we don't have any stretching. It's usually easier when you scale this up. So you can see the squares aren't quite square, they're elongated. I'm going to select by island. This one in particular. Sometimes they need to be done individually because it has a hard time unwrapping multiple different pieces at once. So I have all my individual boards, and it just makes it a lot easier to move these individual pieces to what I want to show with the wood. I'm not going to go too crazy with the bottom because it's not really seen. But for the most part, like, this isn't that bad. Everything will be uniform. All of the wood grain will be the same size, not varied sizes. So now we need to make adjustments to these panels because they're all rotated the wrong way. rotate. Make sure my sides are good. Now this is meant to be one piece here. So I'm going to select these faces as well as these. Make sure I have nothing extra. And then I'm just going to do a projection map on it. You can do it in the y-axis, or let's see, the x-axis. And then just relax. Now, if things are different sizes, like now that I just did that one separately, the checkers are different, I can select everything, Control A, and this button right here rescales all the elements to be the same size. I'll fix this side as well. And that's it. These pieces would also need to be rotated, but you don't want to be squishing the UVs. You would want to just move them in a position where it's more ideal if the knot looks funny being on the side or something like that. You will also need things like wood ends, like textures of wood ends at times, because the wood end typically looks a lot different than the sides and the top and bottom. Like this. Select this, rotate. F2 allows me to turn off highlight. And then if that just wasn't a good spot, all I have to do, I can either turn it on in my actual editor. I need to close this because it's not recognizing the new texture assignment, and I can just create a new one. So I'm going to collapse 2. Create a new one. And now I can actually see my wood texture. So I can. So then I can just find a spot that works good. Like this probably isn't that great, but I can move this over a little bit, and now I see a little bit less detail. Essentially you don't want to be doing this. That's not good. If it doesn't work, then you need to either create a secondary material and do material ID, or just work with a different texture. Maybe this texture has too much that tells you that it's repeating. Now, if I do have different colored planks, so let's create a multi-sub-object material. I'll steal this one. And I'll create a couple variations of this. So Control C, Shift. I'll create a much darker version. I'll create one more, I'll do a light version as well. Let me get rid of all of this real quick. And I'm going to set my material ID number because I just like to keep it clean. All right, so I'm going to apply this to our tabletop. Make sure all of these are visible in the viewport for right now. Okay. Now I'm going to go into my UVW. And one thing that you can do is, this is showing all IDs. Down here, you can show certain UVs for certain material IDs. So especially if you name them, which I didn't, it'll be easy to find out which pieces have which material. Okay. So that can be pretty useful at times, rather than having UVW map, UVW map, UVW map, all these stacked on top of each other. It's easier to just use one. Use a unwrap UVW. Create your seams, put a checker on it, make sure everything is relaxed and nice looking. If you need to adjust scale of a certain texture, then do it right in the texture. Change it here. Now, in this case, I would have to change 3 maps, but if you set this up where it's one plugged into all of these color corrects, it's a lot better. So now I can change my scale and it goes across all different material IDs. So Now, if you get stretching when you apply Turbo Smooth, then your base geometry might be too low. So if you apply one Turbo Smooth iteration and then collapse, and then apply another Turbo Smooth later and leave that, that will work better. So even pieces like this can be unwrapped a lot better. There's a lot of stretching going on. Again, you want everything to be even so that when you apply a texture, it's not getting stretched in a certain direction. Now, for objects like this where it's got a curve to it, sometimes it's better to have it be uniform and straight. But if the geometry doesn't line up and it's not consistent, then uniform doesn't work. So if I cut this piece out, it should break it. It gets confused. It doesn't know what to do, and it won't straighten properly because you took that one piece of it and broke it. So everything needs to be uniform horizontally and vertically in the UV in order to use straighten. Straighten.
Nếu mà mình cắt một mảnh ra ấy, thì nó sẽ thêm một cái điểm nữa, thì khi họ sẽ UV tất cả điểm sang một đường thẳng này, cái kia thêm đường thẳng, nếu thêm một điểm nữa thì nó sẽ bị, nếu có một điểm nữa ở giữa nó bị dị dạng, rồi nó bị dạng hình học của như vậy thì nó sẽ không hoạt động được nữa.
Make sure they're all scaled. I missed these two pieces. And now we're looking a lot better. If the geometry is the same, of course, you can apply it to all of them. So I can delete this one and paste the same one in there. And now we're done. So you spend a little bit of time on one thing and it's done right, and now you can apply it to 4 things. for basic pieces like this, since between the shell and the edit poly, things were changed on the vertice level. There's no point in keeping the edit poly and the shell. We can just collapse. Just don't collapse the smooth. Don't collapse smooth. Do not, yeah. Don't do this. Do not. Keep it like this. It makes the scenes run better. It makes the files easier to use and easier to edit. Even pieces like this, you shouldn't use UV map. You should use the unwrap UVW, and since it's a basic shape, it's pretty easy to create UVs for this. Even if we manually make our seams real quick and go around the edges here, we can do it that way, or we can just do a flatten map. I set mine to 89 because I don't want a bunch of little pieces like this. I don't want all these tiny little pieces. I want bigger pieces. So if you set it to 89, the threshold will essentially look at anything that's 90 degrees and then it will create a seam there rather than creating seams at like 40-degree thresholds. But that's it. It's just as fast as a UVW map, and it's a lot cleaner. UVW maps give you very bad UVs. They create jagged seams, and they just don't look good. Do they want an example of when it's really bad? No? Okay. So if we create a UVW map with a box projection, we will get some weird seams at times, and it's not ideal to have a seam right in the middle of this cylinder and then another one over here. You really want everything to be in like one big shape and then have a hidden seam somewhere. So think of like a seat cushion. If the seat cushion is wrapping around the front, you don't want a seam right on the front of it that's jagged, breaking up the fabric. Look what it's doing. It's breaking this geometry up right in the middle. It's creating really odd non-welded UVs. It's just not ideal. So if we go in here instead and just create 3 seams, it'll be a lot easier to use. It'll be a lot nicer in general, cleaner. So let's just create real quick. Select everything, do a planar just to get rid of all UVs, and then select my seam edges. So probably one here on that side, one on this side, and then one like on the bottom, hidden away. I make that cut, and then I can adjust this one later or go into side view now and make sure I deselect that piece, those edges. All I have to do is hit break, Control B. Sometimes uniform will get rid of those really tight twists. Uniform just spreads it out and then you can do it again. I'm going to weld these two back together and then relax it. Make sure everything's the same size and pack it. It's just a much cleaner and nicer way to adjusting our UVs. I'm going to collapse to this because I don't need it anymore, especially if you're done with your UVs. Don't leave it in there. There's no point. Every time you launch Max, it's recreating anything you have in the modifier stack. So if I have an edit poly, a bend, FFD, and all of these things, whenever I open that max file, it's creating edit poly, bend, FFD, turbo smooth. It's doing that whole thing before it opens. So the more you have in these modifier stacks, the longer your files will take to open. Another thing you can do, if you have multiple objects on a SKU, multiple pieces, and you want all their UVs to be the same scale, you don't need to apply a UVW or an unwrap modifier to all of the pieces. You can use map scaler. I don't like the world space modifier because it has to stay on top, and I want this to be below my turbo smooth. Yeah. Yeah, so I want the map scaler modifier to be below turbo smooth so I can collapse it. I've noticed that it doesn't like turbo smooth that much, but turbo smooths are easy enough to delete and recreate. So before I apply this, I'm just gonna cut my turbo smooth out, create the modifier again. It's hard to search when it has a world space modifier as well. Map scaler. Like 10 inches. I don't know why it's getting mad about that. So that's not working right. It's adjusting. I don't know why it's breaking the geometry or the UVs for this. It's not supposed to do that. It's just a display. Well, no, it's not. Let me try this. Weird. So it's supposed to take everything that's attached to it and you can assign a specific size to it. Since that's not working, you can also use a UVW X form. And you can adjust it that way. So if I was trying to match this one, I could just keep increasing the tile until it reaches that point. So maybe like 20 by 20. And then again, collapse. So basically, no more of this. Nice square UVs. If you have textures like this, you know it's bad. So for things like this, you wanna do what Nia does with labs. You wanna create special masks to create the minor details, but then have a base wood that you work with. So instead of using a bunch of these, like different little tiny variations, you can color correct and play in Photoshop to create something bigger that matches based off of grunge detail and layering different woods. So it's much bigger, a lot more detail, and a lot more variety. So you don't need multiple textures. You can use one or two and mix them all together.